Is you is or is you ain't my baby. Maybe baby found somebody new. Is you is or is you ain't my baby. Tell me baby true.
The Roaring Twenties was a time of prosperity in America. After increased production during World War I, industry was thriving and the standard of living increased. Because of the devastating wartime tensions, America favored an isolationist policy to focus on its own success. There were numerous innovations that helped increase mass production, the most influential of which was Ford's assembly line. As automobile production became more cheap and efficient, they became more available to common people. This innovation made society increasingly more mobile as well as focused on consumer goods. Women were the biggest market during this time period. They began to express more freedom and break away from traditional values. The new woman image was constructed using new products geared toward women. One piece of this was the new emphasis on fashion and vanity. Maybelline and other cosmetic companies popularized makeup products, and the electric sewing machine allowed for new growth in the fashion industry. Women were also the market for new household appliances and technologies, which were made possible by the standardization of electricity through such companies as General Electric. Inventions such as the electric washer and dryer, as well as the electric vacuum, began to become common household items. Another innovation, the refrigerator freezer, led to new ability to store frozen food, which had become normalized in the World War I era. These items also prompted a new domestic standard for women, which competed with the new woman image as it preserved female ties with domestic duties and chores like cooking and cleaning. The rise of advertising helped to establish these ideas and sell these products more. The telephone was a growing invention that had a place in half of American homes by 1930. The radio and the automobile also became extremely popular. The concept of buying on credit and installment plans are what allowed middle-class people to make such large purchases. Over time, there were too many people in debt and unable to pay for these programs due to insufficient wages that it led to a major economic crash. This era is what became known as the Great Depression. While the culture remained similar to times past, changing economic and shifting political policy of this time represented the coming of a new era characterized by more modern ways of life. The Great Depression officially began in late October 1929 when the stock market crashed due to the overconfidence of Americans in the rising 20s economy.
The people played this game where they bought and sold stocks, not to get a hand in business, but to make quick money. America was always about that, you know. Nowadays with the lottery, and back then it's always been the self-made man, striking it rich in California, or even Jamestown at that. They bought stocks, anticipating prices to rise, and when they did, they sold them to make a profit. They call this buying on the margin. The stock market first crashed on the 24th when there were too many people selling their stocks and no one buying them. This became known as Black Thursday. Over the next 2 business days, a frantic group of bankers bought the stocks and selling resumed, only to fall again on the following Tuesday, and that became known as Black Tuesday. After this whole scare, they could see how playing the system without work really bit them in the butt. It freaked people out for a while, even enough that their ways of getting money changed for a while. With the massive recession, people had to change their ways.
But this was not the only thing causing major trouble for the American economy. For one thing, wealth was concentrated heavily in the hands of the rich few who were the major high-up players of the consumer goods industry, as it usually is in American society. This left the rest of the population to low and stagnant wages while the upper-class income continued to rise. These people were ordering increased production of consumer goods that average people could not afford to buy. This overproduction led to a surplus of goods, which led to instability. This same issue had been found within the farming industry for decades upon decades. Those low profits caused an economic decline completely unexpected by the American population. The weak governmental policy did not help matters. The Republican idea of laissez-faire and hands-off policy led to the free fall of the economy.
All of a sudden, product values are down, income is down, banks are down, and I mean hella down. They were closed. Money value is down. The only thing up was unemployment, and that's So basically, the U.S. economy was on fire, and the people were on fire, and the whole world was on fire, and everyone was dying.
Donald, you can't talk like that.
Well, sorry, Dave. Sorry you don't know economics like I do.
The global economy at the time was also on a decline due to debts of World War I. In 1924, foreign powers had adopted the Dawes Plan to cycle the balance of debt between Germany, Great Britain, and the U.S., adding to the pseudo-prosperity of the 20s. This plan, instead of decreasing debt, just shifted it around from nation to nation. This short-term band-aid of a plan was unsuccessful as soon as the banks who circulated the money failed. More countries around the world were faced with the harsh realities of debt.
Herbert Hoover ran in 1928 with a bright mind and promising campaign slogans.
Ours is a land rich in resources, stimulating in its glorious beauty, filled with millions of happy homes, blessed with comfort and opportunity. In no nation are the institutions of progress more advanced. In no nation are the fruits of accomplishment more secure. In no nation is the government more worthy of respect. No country is more loved by its people. I have an abiding faith in their capacity, integrity, and high purpose. I have no fears for the future of our country. It is bright with hope.
Little did he and the American public know that he would be very, very wrong.
The world was in debt to America, and we were being strict about it. There's really no other way to put it. One of the few economic policies Hoover bothered himself to create was the Dawes Plan, which established a cycled debt payment where the U.S. lent Germany money that eventually paid us back. Completely moronic. We were paying back our own debts in a weird circular fashion. I don't know who gave that plan a green light. Hoover was a Republican who, of course, supported their trademark idea of laissez-faire economics or hands-off policy. After watching the economy suffer for a while, he decided on a trickle-down policy where he put money and assistance into the upper class, hoping it would feed into the lower. However, he refused to assist in the complete crisis and suffering faced by the lower classes directly. And, as expected, trickle-down was another failure. This foreshadowed the need for a shift in wealth distribution so that there is more money in circulation around the middle/working class. This wasn't the first time this had been an issue. We saw this back in the Panic of 1837, but now there is finally change to these policies coming.
Hoover's poor executive decisions and lack of intervention in people's suffering led to a sharp decrease in popularity of the Republican Party, which would lead a large political change for the nation. The Democrats were coming back into power, and they were bringing Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And he wasn't alone. He brought with him his wife, Eleanor Roosevelt, who championed women's rights, and a group of advisors called the Brain Trust. This group appointed officials and advisors that were the most diverse group of people ever seen in the executive government. Giving these people a voice was a step toward equality and inclusion of minority groups, including women, Catholic, and Jews. While they were not often specifically helped in New Deal programs, they were represented in government in strengths unprecedented.
The people of America really saw the coming of FDR as a sign of hope. He promised us a new deal and said that he would focus on relief, recovery, and reform for our nation. We were desperate then. We really needed someone to come in, take charge, and fix things up, you know? In his first plan, he focused on recovery from the Depression, short-term emergency help. It was especially nice that he directly talked to us on the radio. Helped to calm people down. Everyone was really upset at the time. Social things and cultural things were way more under the radar than in the 20s. That was an age of total social focus, but now we had to focus on survival. Putting food on the table, looking for a job. Some of us even had to steal. We didn't have the time or resources to go out and do as much stuff, so we focused on our families, spent time with each other instead of on ourselves. That sense of community was strengthened. However, there were harsh realities. They stopped that whole prohibition movement. My husband started drinking again. That meant he started beating me again. He just can't control his temper with liquor in him. His drinking meant that we weren't doing as much to get money for our family, so I did what I had to do. I became a prostitute. I'm not ashamed of it because it was the only way I could feed me and my children. My husband sure weren't happy about it, so he up and left. A poor man's divorce, they called it. I haven't seen him since, but good riddance. It was hard on me and the kids, though. Sometimes I would take them to the movies if I could. just a way to escape for a while. They made happy ones back then. We needed to be happier.
Unfortunately, Ethel Honeybun Smith's story was much like many others during the Depression. The social issues of crime, prostitution, alcoholism, and poverty were a stark change from the prosperity of the past. Roosevelt planned to stop these issues by attacking the root of the problem.
The first New Deal was focused on recovery, which meant emergency and short-term help. One of the first acts passed by Congress under FDR was the Emergency Banking Relief Act, which really got the banks back on their feet. He created a bank holiday to close the banks and only reopened them when the federal government approved them. Before this, absolutely no one had trust in their banks, which was a leading cause for their failure. This policy helped to restore that trust. Before this, 28 states didn't have a single bank. 28! That's over half of the country. So when you really look at it, FDR's New Deal of government intervention and regulation was completely necessary. Otherwise, the country would have had no way of getting out of the deep hole of debt they had dug.
And implementing government policy to strengthen the economy once again. Another major institution from this part of the deal was the CCC, or Civilian
Hoover had a
Conservation
philosophy
Corps,
of doing as little as possible
who
with the
employed
economy.
men to do federal
Roosevelt's
work
new
and
reign
gave their
completely
families a
flipped the
salary.
switch to the government helping out in every way it could with the economy, more than ever before. The CCC represented this switch in the way that the government was hands-on in getting involved in citizen intervention. The Tennessee Valley Authority was another similar idea. The government paid thousands of people to move to the Tennessee Valley and work on federally funded public works. It brought electricity to the region. Not only did the TVA create more jobs, but increase the standard of living in one of the poorest areas of the nation. The New Deal policies were commonly multifaceted, like the CCC, the TVA, and I think that's what made them so unique and successful.
This large-scale attempt to stimulate the economy and offer jobs was the new concept that characterized the government policy of the early 1930s. There was even an attempt to help farmers economically by paying them to reduce food production with the AAA. Although this act was shot down, however, this was a milestone in trying to change the faults in farmers' economics that had been problematic for years.
Nope, it's mine now. After institutions like this, it was time to move on to long-term help. The second New Deal consisted of relief and reform, which entailed more future-focused solutions. The WPA, or Works Progress Commission, was a large relief agency focused on providing people with jobs. This highly democratic move toward a welfare state meant that the government's federal power was strongly increased to assist in the well-being of its citizens. Republican Gilded Age beliefs were washed out with the creation of public services, such as Social Security, where the elderly were provided with a small sum for living expenses in their old age. This policy still continues today. Also persisting today are the fundamental business regulations. Contrasting to the hostility toward unions in the 1920s, the government actually encouraged unions and guaranteed them rights with things such as the National Industry Act of 1933. The Fair Labor Standards Act put unprecedented regulations on businesses. With these types of things, we can finally see America looking out for its people instead of putting such heavy emphasis on business. But the old Republican ways were not going down without a fight. There was extremely strong opposition to the new governmental changes. These conservatives attacked the idea of federal government gaining so much power, arguing that it was the beginning of the transition of America to socialism or even communism. They firmly believed that the government and the economy of a nation are two separate entities that should not be linked, although that is exactly what was happening. On the other hand, liberals were also upset with the policies saying that minorities were excluded from the help offered by the government. There was still much discrimination against minorities and immigrants. Women were not given the same labor standards as men, not guaranteed equal wages, and more. Immigrants were sometimes excluded from unions. Farmers, as seen in past eras, were not assisted as much as businesses. Industry was slowly back on the rise by the end of the 1930s, but farming was on a decline. The Dust Bowl hit the breadbasket of America and hit it hard.
My family was forced to move west to California to get away from those dust storms. Those storms yanked my mama's crops right out the ground, and there was nothing we could do about it. No, sir. My poor mama. I was just a youngin' at the time, didn't know nothing else. And when we were uprooted just like those crops, headed west. We weren't greeted with no warm and welcome either. No, sir. We were hated, shunned even. My older brother stole us a tarp, and we made ourselves a home out of it. 3 of us, me, him, and my mama. One of those shanty towns. Hooverville. We poor farmers got the short end of the stick, didn't we?
The 1930s was a period of quick and drastic change for America as the Great Depression called for a shift in power from Republican to Democrat. This change of the nation's ideals and concepts of government intervention strongly influenced the social, political, and economic paths of America. The New Deal was the culmination and enaction of this change brought by FDR. These policies helped dig the country out of the many problems it was facing and put America back on the rise. Many of these new ideas and concepts, which emerged from the tumultuous time, have driven America to reign its stance as a world power and influence its operation to this day.